Hey, my name is Scott, and we live in North Carolina. Today I'm cooking a brisket, but that's not what I want to talk about. I want to do a video on the long hold with respect to Boston butts, i.e. pork barbecue, because I cook a lot of pork butts each month, and probably 6 or 8, and I have been using some form or fashion of the long hold for a long time. And there are several different versions of the long hold that I see on YouTube. I watch a lot of barbecue rock stars on YouTube. I've made a few videos relating to ham radio. This is the first one I've ever made about smoking meat, maybe the last one I'll ever do. I did an experiment, which I want to show you, comparing 3 different versions of the long hold, which I found on YouTube. This first one is Papa Joe 18-hour hot hold pork butt. And this is where Papa Joe cooks a pork butt in the typical way, at a middling temperature of 250 degrees up to past the stall, and then he wraps it in butcher paper and then takes it to probe tenderness, or 200 plus degrees, and then he puts it in a warm oven at 155 degrees for 18 hours. That's the first method. The second method is by Steve Gow, Smoke Trails. His video is entitled, "I Invented a New Method to Smoke Pork Butt." And he does something a little bit different. He cooks it to 190. And he pulls it off early at 190, and then he puts it in an aluminum pan and puts it in his holding oven at 155 degrees for 18 hours. And by the way, he did not wrap. He cooked it naked, shall we say, until it hit 190. And then the third method is by YouTubers called Kind of Cooking, where they use sous vide for their long hold, and I do that a lot too. The video is called "Do You Sous Vide Before or After Smoking?" And they resolved that sous viding after smoking, that is smoking first and then sous viding, is the better way to go. And they did something radical. They smoked for 4 hours to about 140 degrees, and then they put it in a vacuum seal bag and sous vide it at 165 for 18 hours. Now you notice that the common feature of all of these is 18 hours of long hold. This is the design of the experiment if you want to pause the video and study it. But in short, I staggered the beginnings of the 3 cooks so that the smoking phase of all 3 would end at midnight of the first day. Then all 3 Boston butts went into the 18-hour long hold at midnight, and the long hold ended for all 3 of them at 6 p.m. the second day, so that we could pull them and taste them all at the same time. I decided to use a half of a Boston butt for each of the candidates instead of a whole one, so I deboned 2 Boston butts and bound them up in twine because they get a little floppy when they're deboned, as you know, and I cut them long way. I split them in half long way because the muscle groups change from bone in to money muscle in, and some of them are more succulent than the others, and I didn't want that to be an extra variable. And I used 3 of these and put the 4th one in the freezer. And you see I used a typical rub, coarse grained pepper, salt, and a little garlic powder. So here's a picture of one of the half butts with the rub on it. So here is the first half butt on the smoker. I decided to use my pellet grill. Admit it, you can hold temperatures steadier and more dependably on a pellet grill than an offset. And I didn't want temperature swing to become another variable. And then a couple hours later, the second one goes on. And so here are the 2 a little bit farther along, and then it's time to wrap the number 1 butt, the Papa Joe butt, and then it goes back on, and then finally at about 8 p.m., it's time to put on the third half butt, and here they are a little bit further along. And then almost midnight the first day, number 1 comes off, number 2 comes off, number 3 comes off, goes into the sous vide, while numbers 1 and 2 go into the aluminum trays covered and into the oven. Okay, finally, it's pushing 6 p.m. on Tuesday at the end of the 18-hour hold, and I pulled the 1 and 2 out of the oven and number 3 out of the sous vide, and then pulled them, and it's time for the experiment. The jury was made up of my wife, Jeanette, our friend Susan, and me. The 3 of us used this ballot that you will see, where we graded each one on smokiness, tenderness, and juiciness. We found them all to be tender, so we just struck through that one. And we graded them on smokiness and juiciness. They were all 3 delicious, but you can see from the ballot that number 2 got the most high scores. It got 5 1s and 1 2, and number 3 got 1 1 and 5 2s. It's interesting that we were all in substantial agreement that number 2 was the best and number 3 was the second best. So what do we make of this? Well, the thing that I had pondered is whether if you cook it all the way and then do the long hold, like Papa Joe did in number 1, would it turn out to be mushy? But if you did it the Steve Gow way and stopped short at 190 degrees and then did the long hold, would it still get fully done and become tender? Well, we've got our answer. You do it Steve Gow's way, stop at 190, and then do the long hold, and you end up with a very tasty, tender, and juicy product. And it's also worth noting that the need to cook method of smoking for 4 hours and then sous videing at 165 for 18 hours produced quite a nice product too. It got the second highest score, but we pretty much agreed that Steve Gow's was the best. It's now a few days later. We've already eaten that brisket that I cooked. We ate it at a 4th of July family gathering. It was pretty darn good. But I got to thinking, as I reflected back on the experiment, that since methods 2 and 3 were the best, what would it be like to do something of a compromise between the 2 of them? And so here is what I did. I took that 4th half butt, you remember that I put in the freezer, and I smoked it for, gosh, it took about 7 or 8 hours to get it up to 176 internal. And my thought there was, let's smoke it past the stall to get good bark on it. And since we're cooking it longer, since we're smoking it longer, let's sous vide it less. Remember, Need to Cook did 4 hours of smoke and 18 hours of sous vide at 165. I did about 8 hours of smoke up to 176 and 10 hours of sous vide at 165. I thought this might be a nice balance between a really short 4-hour smoke and something more along the line of a true smoke and then a shorter long hold. So just a few photos. Like before, here is that 4th butt that we're going to do this experiment with. And here it is with the seasoning on it. And then here it is when I first put it on the smoker. And here it is after it has smoked up to 176 internal. And then here it is in the sous vide. And here it is when I took it out of the sous vide. And I want to say that the way I determined to test whether 10 hours was enough was I squeezed it in my hand. You see my thumb squeezing in, and I could tell it was very tender and that it would just fall apart once I got it out of the sous vide bag. And then here it is, pulled. It just pulled beautifully, and it looked beautiful, and it tasted great. So I didn't have a jury on this one, but in my opinion, I guess I'm the jury. It's my favorite of all 4. Smoke till you get past the stall, Then sous vide it at 165 for 10 hours, and then pull it, and it will be tender and tasty and smoky and delicious. This is an epilogue where I want to report on events that followed the video that you just viewed. I had a church picnic for our church to cook 3 Boston butts for service on a Wednesday night at 6 p.m. And so I decided to put my money where my mouth is and cook these 3 Boston butts according to the way that you just saw, the number 4 method, where I smoked the Boston butts in this in my offset up to the mid 170s internal to get past the stall and to create a lot of good bark, and it did. And then I brought them inside and put them in vacuum seal bags and put them in a sous vide bath at 165 degrees for 12 hours. And I want to tell you that they were absolutely delicious. They were perfect. You know, you take a little bit of a risk when you're serving your friends at church, because you see them every Sunday at least, and you don't want to mess this one up. So I was a little anxious about it, but I want to tell you they were perfect, all 3 of them. Now, I don't often use the word perfect to describe something I've cooked, but I just don't know how pork barbecue could be any better than how that turned out to be. So this is a full-on endorsement for the number 4 method that you've just viewed. So I think a wiser man than me would end the video there. I've done what I came to do, but I got to get this off my chest. I want to ask you a question. What is this? It's meat, right? Don't call it protein. It's meat. Come on. I want to ask you another question. What is this? Yep, it's meat. Don't call it this bad boy. It's not a bad boy. It's meat. Come on. So thanks for watching. Thanks especially for putting up with my snark there at the end. And I wish you the best.